attorney and a partner at Moirai Legal Consultancy, and he's got 15 plus years of global legal experience, both in private practice and in in-house legal counseling. I would actually leave the man to speak for himself, because he's going to speak on something which is very interesting to all of us. And
thank you very
over
much.
to you, Suresh.
Thank you.
Is that,
Yeah.
is it working?
Yeah, it is. Thank you, and again, I'd like to thank IIMS for the opportunity to speak on wills. I will try to be as brief as possible. There are 22 slides in the packet, but I'm only going to cover 9 of them. That's the bread and butter of the will section. The rest of it you can pretty much read on your own time, because the presentations will be distributed by email once for all of those who have registered. So, just a bit on Moray for 2 seconds. Moray was a legal consultancy that myself and my partner set up last year. We were both ex-AIG employees, and after leaving AIG, we set up Moray Legal Consultancy, which provides a variety of services, primarily focused in the corporate commercial area. All right. The next slide is just myself and my partner. Again, all this you can pretty much go through during your own time. So I won't spend much time on this. Apsara is my partner. She's my colleague and my partner. She's also a licensed attorney. So going into wills. Okay. The first is, why do we need a will? And I've outlined here some of the reasons, and just to go briefly through them. These may not be all the reasons, but these are some of the reasons why we will need a will, or why we should have a will. One is to protect what you value the most. And again, that's your family, your spouse, your children. Again, a will has to do with an event that none of us can predict. The vast majority of instances, it's one of those things that can never be predicted. You cannot plan for it, you cannot set a date on it. So by having the will itself, it ensures that you have at least done some preparation work, some planning itself. It protects your assets, one. It protects the distribution of those assets. It ensures the guardianship of your children are in the place, are with the person who you want them to be with. And it ensures, the most important thing is it ensures that there is a smooth process. And that's what wills does, whether it's in UAE or anywhere in the world. It's a process. The will itself and the probate of a will sets up a process, and you can rely on that process if should anything happen. And not only that, so can your family. The last piece I put in there is it's important not only to just draft a will and file a will, but anybody who's involved in that will, whether it is guardians, temporary guardians, permanent guardians, executors, they all are aware that they are in your will, and they also know that there is a will and where the will is recorded, and what should they do in the event there is a will. Now, if you, and as we go through, you'll see why. I'll come back to some of this, especially this point itself. Wills, in the absence of a will, what happens? If you are a resident and if you have assets in UAE, then if there is no will, it is that area law will apply. Okay, And the Sharia law applies both to the assets and to the guardianship itself. Because, again, keep in mind, in UAE, the government has given you an opportunity to create a will, and we want the guardianship. If you decide not to avail of that opportunity, then obviously by default it goes to the standard law that governs this country, which again is Sharia. Okay. So basically that's with the application. Now this is a sample, and again this is a sample of how the distribution of assets would occur. Okay, it's an illustrative. It's more for an illustration. Should you not have a will, should you choose that you don't need a will for whatever reason, and basically, depending on the scenarios. Now again, these are just three different examples. For each individual, it's going to be very different because you have to look at your family situation, and based on that, you get different variations and percentages itself. So this is not all-inclusive. This is just an illustrative of what would happen if you choose not to draft a will, not to file a will.
This is in the UAE?
In the UAE, yes. Again, the distribution of assets that are here in UAE. If you have assets in another country, then if it would be based on the law of that country, or you could have a will with foreign assets too. But again, this is exclusively what happens if you don't do that. And keep in mind, again, I've not put the guardianship aspect, but again, guardianship it would again flow consistent with the Sharia principles. Okay. So basically, the UAE government has given you three options, or two options, really, two or three options, depending on how you see it. One is the DIFC will and probate registry, and the second is a notary system. The notary system is basically, the DIFC is a common law system, so it follows more of the British system, the American system. The notary system, again, goes more to do with the local law, local code system, which is the Dubai codes or the Abu Dhabi codes. So both of them have a will system. Okay, so you could do a will and again translate it to Arabic, get it notarized and file it. Now, the law of 15/2017 basically sets up the new wills registry for the Dubai code system. And the Abu Dhabi codes also set up last year a will system. So both the notary systems are new, but they have a process in place to register wills, so it can be done. And as we go through it, you'll see the distinctions between the two of them. But again, the IFC is a common law system. It has its own rules. It has its own judges. So the probate would actually happen within the DIFC codes. So it wouldn't be that you register in the DIFC codes and then it's referred to Dubai codes for probate. The probate still happens within the DIFC system. The same would be whether you chose Abu Dhabi or Dubai. And again, the probate would happen in those specific and with the judges of that jurisdiction itself. Okay. Going to the next slide. These are basically some definitions. I threw them out there. What is a will executor versus the state administrator? The main difference is really the state administrator is appointed by the code. When you don't will a will executor, you appoint yourself, you choose. So, if you have a mirror will for husband and wife, you can, each one can appoint as the executor, not just a beneficiary, but also as an executor. We have done wills, myself and my partner, where we have had the spouses appoint each other, and they had, even in that case, they had backup executors, should anything happen to both of them at the same time. And then just the register itself. Okay, here's the rules relating to the wills of Dubai courts. Again, for filing of wills. The biggest advantage of Dubai and Abu Dhabi is the cost factor. The cost is very low, 2,000 to 3,000 dirhams, compared to the IIT, and we'll get to the IIT, please. But IIC will. So again, the IIC will has some limitation. It's limited to properties, assets, companies that you own within Dubai and Ras Al Khaimah, and the children are resident in Dubai or Ras Al Khaimah. If you have assets in other Emirates, the DIC will not cover it. The cost again and is ranging from 5,000 to 15,000. A full mirror will be 15,000. A single will, a full single will is about 10,000. And there are a slew of other options within the DIFC wills. So you can have just a guardianship will, you can have a property will if that's all you're concerned with. And again, the cost or the fees associated, the government fees associated with each will is different. But it ranges anywhere between 5,000 to 15,000 euros. There is also another difference at this point. Again, because the Dubai and Abu Dhabi systems are new, I'm not sure how many cases have been probated. But in the DIFC, there have been 10 plus cases, at least 10 cases that have been probated. So they have a tested process to say. But again, so that's one of the differences. Just going to the 3 takeaways. I thought this was important. If there's nothing else you get from this presentation, my presentation, I suggest you start with these 3 things. These are critical, especially if you have a family, especially if you have assets in this year. The first is to make sure that you have financial resources to cover you for short term. When I say short term, approximately 6 months, maybe a plus or minus a few more months. Again, like I said, wills is a process. It does take time. It will take time. It's a smooth process, and it's been tested in the DIFC. And it should be a smooth process both in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, where you'll have to see as they probate wills itself. The second piece I said is make sure you have an insurance policy. Now, I'm a lawyer, I have no benefit, but my suggestion is have the insurance policy. Understand the claims process for that insurance policy and how the claims payout would happen. The reason is, again, you can try to have enough financial resources to cover for the first few months in the event of a death, but you should be able to have the life insurance policy help you for the remainder period. And I've said 12 to 18 months minimum. But again, life insurance policies are much higher, so you won't really have that. And then the last thing is to make sure that you have a will that is enforceable, that's been really tested, you've made sure you've taken into consideration everything, especially if there are kids involved. And if you're going, and I've said this as an example, if you appoint your parents as guardians or your brother or sister, and they are not in this country, and your children are in this country, you may want to consider a temporary guardian till the family member, the permanent guardians, can come into the country and take custody of the children. And again, I'm saying this because we've done this as with experience. We've done this for people. So whatever will you do, just don't type a template. Make sure you take the full picture into consideration. So those are my three key takeaways. Nothing at all. You can always go and get a good lawyer and they can help you through the process. But engage someone who can guide you through this process. There will be people who might do it for you from a typing basis, but they will not be able to guide you in the event that you really need to do something. And there are times when, I'm sure there are probably lawyers in the crowd, but where we have seen things that are done mechanically, and they fail because they were done mechanically and not thought through. So it's very critical that you think the whole process through. Okay. Those are our services, what we normally do step by step, what we do with the client from the start to finish. Basically, we meet with the client, and again, whichever lawyer you consult with, should take it pretty much to the same process. Which first they have to understand your needs, what you have, what you want to do, how you want to do it. Then they should also advise you on the options, you know. And again, it's not one shoe fits all. Everyone has different needs, and you have to basically tailor your choices, whether you choose at the IFC or the Dubai or Abu Dhabi code. You need to choose based on your needs and where you are itself. And then we help with basically we work with the guardians if there are guardians involved, if there are children involved. We get to basically make sure you're comfortable with the will, the way it's read, and then we help you to do the registration process itself, whatever that is, depending on the jurisdiction. So then we come to the Q&A, so I'll take any questions. The remaining slides I'm not going to cover through because they are really about the different services Mori Legal Consultancy provides, and it's not really related to wills. So I'll open it for any questions you may have.
I've got a question. You do both my voice is loud, I don't need a mic. You do both the IFC and the Dubai court quiz, right?
Yes.
So you said that there are only 10 cases in the IFC that have been done as a probate, but you have no account of any other cases that have been done in Dubai court.
No, we don't. And again, the Dubai code system there was an existing system, and then in 2017, when the government announced the new law, they put in a new system that did not invalidate the old wills. All the old wills are still valid, but we don't have an exact count, yes, of how many probate. But from what I understand, under the new system, because it just came into play, there has been no wills probated under the new system.
But in the previous system, they have been.
I'm not sure about that.
If I can,
Yes.
Suresh and I have been discussing this recently. The personal affairs section of the Dubai codes has been reorganized recently, and the general sense that one gets is nobody really knows what's going on. They've moved to a new building, all of the processes are new, so nobody really has a sense of what the right thing to do is. Previously there was a system, and it had lots of difficulty uh, not merely the fact that everything is in Arabic, but also there were no, but there still are no specialist probate practitioners. You just find any local applicant and you go, try to get the courts to do something sensible. So that's the big worry with the local courts. You just show up and something happens. You can't say this is what is supposed to happen and that's what will happen. So that's the concern with the local courts.
Eventually, local courts are not that good. That's what you're trying to say.
No, it's again it's a new law. It hasn't been. It's just been implemented.
No, the
And
reason
you have to
I'm
give
asking
time
you
to-
because I got my will done before 2017.
Yeah.
And you're trying to tell me that basically what I've got done is really not that good.
No, not.
I'm just trying to interpret my own security here now, so it's a very
No,
straightforward question.
Again, if you have a will that was done before the new law came into play, you should look at it. And if it was registered in the Dubai court, I don't see
It
it.
is.
I'm not, and again, I don't see that it's necessarily an issue. And again, it depends on your personal situation. And again, this is a personal matter, so it's better not to. I don't want to go into
No,
it.
it's not a personal matter. I just want to know I'm secure or not.
You should be secure because the law exists.
Okay.
And there should be a process. Now, like Henry correctly pointed, again, the law is new and they are trying to put things in place.
That could be a challenge.
And that will take time.
And we need to consult him afterwards.
Because again, it depends whether you have children and you don't have, whether you have, if you have children, you have a different story. If it's you, your spouse, and assets, it's a different story.
One quick question. What is the reason for the substantial difference in the price structure between DIFC and Dubai Court?
It's the DIFC system. Everything DIFC is a little bit more expensive. And again, it's a common law system, and versus a civil system. It's a Dubai. Dubai is completely different. And again, DIFC is always more expensive.
I got two questions actually, Suresh. Excellent presentation, thank you. You mentioned that the Dubai courts, if I have property in Dubai, can I still go through the Dubai courts to register the will?
Yes.
Because that bullet point wasn't there on the Dubai courts, was it, for property?
There is, no, Dubai Code does actually say property and guardianship, so. Sorry, no, it does have property, it does include it.
I noticed that, because relevant to me, that's very good. Secondly, if I have a will from, I come from India,
Yeah.
You have a will over there for not 15,000 dirhams, but 15,000 rupees at most, and they'll pick it up from your house and drop it back to your house and stuff like that. Now, if I got the same and I got it registered and stamped and whatever else in Dubai, is that is clearly expressing intent. Logic, but the whole philosophy behind wills is to express intent, as you would testify as legal counsel, right?
Yes.
Would that be sort of accepted?
I think it would go through a process, but again, it depends. I would say if you have assets and you have substantial assets, you actually do the Dubai will. Whether you do a Dubai court will or the IFC will, that's a different choice. But if you have assets and you're bringing in, you just remember, you won't be there. So your wife and children have to run back and forth and try to deal with the embassy, the Indian system, and the consulates, the embassies, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the court system. So I think when you really think about these things, my advice is simplify it for your 1,000 dirhams or 15,000 dirhams. Why?
The properties which are in UAE, anything that you want to govern for UAE, only incorporating the will that you draft and register in UAE. Whatever property you have in India or anywhere else in the world, this law and that law will always have a conflict. Plus, in India, if you are a Hindu, then it is governed by the Hindu law. While here, whatever you have done, then it is very, very simple for anyone to execute it because properties are here, you are here, you could die anywhere in the world, but it was registered here and only for the property and the assets located in this country.
It's sort of define the logic here. How does it matter what religion I am? How does it matter?
No, no, that is not
Where I own the property.
You are
Me,
Yeah, I
my
think
hard-earned
we
dollars.
can
that's the point. That only for UAE, yes, that is the most ideal solution. But property located elsewhere, you will go and have your will registered in that way. That for sure.
According to the laws of that country.
Just one more thing I just want to add here, and I think you could do that, you could try to do it that way, but there's always a point that when it gets to the Dubai Court judge, there is a misunderstanding or an interpretation issue. Okay, what you intended. And by the time it's translated into Arabic, remember you're going to bring an Indian system, an Indian will, and try to enforce it here. It will have to be, it will be, no. Again, I go back to say, simplify it for your family, do it for your family, if nothing else.
It has to be segregated.
You
cannot mix up the property and register in UAE and then if it is not made available to the family, you have a dispute. It is very, very clear that anything that you have in this country, including motor, including bank account, including your ownership of the assets of villa or apartments or anything, or any other fixed or floating, including bank account, it has to be like this.
One more question.
Can I say
One more.
that the will that you create here would be enforceable in India?
No.
Again, you wouldn't want to do that. You want to segregate it because there and trying to enforce it. You would have to go through a whole mechanism for enforcement. You would have to get basically a probate out of here and then try to enforce it in India. If it's registered properly and can it be, it could, but it would not be worth the 10,000 rupees that you're talking about.
So it would be best to register the wills in both locations or wherever you have assets before you can.
You can't do it after.
Obviously, you can't register it after. And enforcing it afterwards is potentially everything needs to be registered well in advance.
Yeah, and the other thing,
whether it's created here or India, and you should.
and the other thing, and again, this point I'm just going to bring up because this is a legal point, but just keep this in mind. If you have a will in another jurisdiction and a will in UAE, make sure the lawyer or whoever is drafting the will, and that's why I say don't just go to typing center, go actually get this done properly, is make sure you say that there is a will for your Indian assets. Because, see, when you say it's the last will, and then for some reason if that will shows up, and it's dated differently thereafter, then there may be an issue. So recognize the existing will and that you separated the wills and the assets. So within the context of that will, at least from what we've done in the past, we have recognized the will in the foreign country. So we have said there is a will dated so and so in India that's in parallel to this will. And this will only addresses properties in UAE. Okay.
I think we will take.
Yeah, I can take the questions.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you very much.
That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
We knew it was going to have a lot of questions. So the idea was to take the questions on after both the presentations were over. So anyway, most of it and the rest can be done afterwards. So now There's a saying where they say, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. What happens when things go bad? I guess experts like Daniel gets going. So we have Daniel Jackson, director from Dr. J. Burgoyne and partners. Reading about him, it's a long list. He started off in 2006, and in 2012 he was a partner with Burgoyne, and he moved over to Dubai in 2013. And the main thing I see is 500 plus incidents which has been covered all over the world. Thank you. I leave the man to speak for himself. Over to you.
Well, good evening. Thanks for coming. Thank you to the IIMS for the invitation to be here and to talk to you about marine cargo incidents, mainly fires and explosions. Thank you, OP, for the introduction. Yes, I'm Dan Jackson. I'm from Burgoyne's. I'm the director of our office here in the Middle East in Dubai. Burgoyne's is a firm of consulting scientists and engineers, and our main work is the forensic investigation of fires, explosions, and engineering failures. We're a global partnership, and 2018 marks our 50th year in operation. The presentation this evening is going to discuss marine cargo fire and explosion incidents, focusing particularly on the concept of self-heating. The presentation covers the principles of self-heating and go on to discuss several types of marine fire and explosion incidents, including those involving container ships, bulk tankers, the extent of advice that we provide during live incidents, and some of the main focal points of our investigations and management of such incidents. Many cargo fire and explosion incidents are due to self-heating in one form or another. In general, self-heating occurs when an exothermic, that is, heat-producing process or chemical reaction happens within a body of cargo. Loss of the heat produced by that reaction is restricted by the surrounding cargo, packaging, dunnage, other containers, etc. And owing to this restricted heat loss, the temperature within the cargo may tend to increase. The rate of most chemical reactions increases with increasing temperature, often roughly doubling for every 10-degree rise in temperature. Therefore, the heating and temperature rise can worsen, which can lead ultimately to a fire in the cargo and surrounding materials. The two main types of reaction which can lead to self-heating: cargo self-reaction or decomposition. Perhaps the best known example here is calcium hypochlorite, but also some fertilizers will behave in a similar fashion. And the second type is oxidation, cargo reacting with oxygen in air. Common examples here are coal, oilseed cakes, direct reduced iron, and some metal powders and turnings. The main principles mentioned above mean that several factors can affect the severity of self-heating and whether it develops to a problematic level. Oxidation can only take place, firstly, if oxygen itself is available. For example, with some coal cargoes, the holds need to be kept closed and sealed to restrict the access of air to the cargo, limiting the oxidation reactions so that the temperatures do not rise to problematic levels. The photo here shows hold hatch covers additionally sealed with polyurethane foam and round neck tape to restrict the entry of air and oxygen. Another cargo, direct reduced iron, needs to be kept dry so it doesn't react with water. If water does enter the hold containing DRI, it can start a self-heating reaction, which can then worsen, leading to oxidation with air and then very severe heating. Self-heating due to oxidation can only progress to a problematic level if enough oxygen can pass into the body of the cargo to produce the heat that cannot then be dissipated. Therefore, the ability of air and oxygen to diffuse into the centre of the stow also needs to be considered. Bulk coal cargoes, for example, need to be properly trimmed to give a compacted, flat surface across the surface of the stow so that air through the stow is restricted. Heat is dissipated less effectively from a larger body, so the prospect of self-heating will depend on the size of the body of the cargo itself. Accordingly, some cargoes have package size restrictions or maximum container loads. Some highly reactive cargoes need to be passivated or aged by exposure to air, so the most easily oxidized parts are reactive before loading takes place. This passivation technique means that the rate of oxidation of the cargo once on board the vessel is reduced, and thus self-heating is less likely. And as I mentioned previously, reactions occur faster at higher temperature. So the loading temperature of some cargoes also needs to be taken into account and restricted accordingly, so that oxidation rates are not too fast. Bulk coal, by way of an example, needs to be loaded at no more than 55 degrees Celsius. The IMO's requirements in some cases address the factors affecting self-heating, such as limiting the cargo load temperature, closing and sealing hatch covers to exclude oxygen and water, flushing holds with inert gas such as nitrogen, again to exclude air and oxygen, stowage of reactive solids away from sources of heat and out of direct sunlight, and proper aging for loading and stuffing. Moving on to look at some examples, firstly turning to containerized reactive solids. And as I said previously, the galvanizing materials fall into this category, along with metal powders which react with water. Hypochlorite cargoes are often used for swimming pool sterilisation and fabric treatments, such as bleaching or washing. They might be declared, or arguably misdeclared, with a generic name such as water bleaching powder, or even a non-standard properly declared dangerous goods. Calcium hypochlorite itself does not oxidise, but can be considered to be relatively unstable, as it does naturally decompose slowly over time, evolving oxygen. And the self-decomposition of this nature can involve heat. So in these cargoes, a self-heating process can happen in which the material towards the middle of the body of the cargo becomes hotter, the rate of decomposition and heating increases, leading ultimately to a condition known as thermal runaway, when the rate of reaction and heating has proceeded beyond the point of no return. The very rapid self-decomposition and evolution of heat and gases that occurs during runaway can produce effects similar to an explosion, as the rapidly expanding mass of hot gases produced during decomposition leads to significant overpressures within the container. In the case of calcium hypochlorite, the gases produced include oxygen, which in combination with the heat that's produced by the decomposition usually leads to almost instantaneous ignition of nearby combustible materials and the spread of a significant fire through the whole. Some factors which might initiate a runaway in a material such as calcium hypochlorite include exposure to heat, perhaps from the sun's rays or the surface of a heated bunker tank within a hold, problems with cargo formulation, contamination introduced at manufacture, spillage and reaction between the cargo and incompatible combustible materials such as timber or other packaging, and the excessive quantities of cargo stowed in a single container unit, or inadequate separation between lots, which might prevent heat dissipating safely and thus promote self-heating. The IMDG code and the International P&I group of P&I clubs, and indeed some shipping lines, provide advice and requirements for the shipping of cargoes of this type, in particular calcium hypochlorite. In some cases, these requirements include refrigerated containers. The code calls for cal hypo cargo to be stowed on and away from other sources of heat. It's worth noting that one of the major issues with misdeclared cargoes is that they might inadvertently be treated as dry goods and then stowed within a hold where they might be subjected to additional heating from sources such as the wing flats of a bunker tank or the waste heat from reefers stowed under deck. In our experience, the container in question is often devoid of contents after the incident, so the precise cause may be difficult to determine unless undamaged containers from the same consignment are present on the vessel. That said, investigation of such incidents can be progressed on several fronts. Reviewing cargo documents from the manufacturer, supplier or shipper might reveal the nature of the material if it has indeed been misdeclared without a proper shipping name. For example, the supplier of, say, water treatment chemicals might turn out to be a leading producer of calcium-based disinfectants, and the consignee might be a vendor of swimming pool peripherals. In terms of the physical evidence, there are a number of diagnostic features which characterise calcium hypochlorite decompositions, such as the evolution of a white plume of vapour, the distribution of grey solid matter and other residues in a direction away from the incident container into the furthest reaches of the hold, and, depending on the type of packaging that's been employed, perhaps also the scattered remains of partially melted drum lids and bases. Chemical analyses are useful as well, as they usually reveal the calcium-rich products of the decomposition, such as the relatively stable salt calcium chloride. If the ship's carbon dioxide fire suppression system has been deployed during the incident, a further secondary carbonation reaction can take place, producing calcium carbonate. Neither of these species would be expected to decompose violently, and their presence amongst the material sprayed around the hold can therefore provide compelling evidence that the precursor was an unstable calcium and chlorine-based compound prone to self-decomposition, given its history of being at the centre of a number of high-profile casualties. Usually the only candidate is calcium hypochlorite. Moving on to discuss self-heating in bulk cargoes. The first example we're going to discuss is coal, which can self-heat due to oxidation in air. The problem is affected by the reactivity of a particular coal, which depends on its source. Hence the IMO's solid bulk code entry for coal, calling for the loading temperature to be limited to a maximum of 55 degrees. So it's important to check coal temperatures before loading and to retract throughout loading, because the temperature at the surface of a pile may be constant. For example, coal in a barge may be much hotter below the surface than near the surface, and coal from a stockpile ashore may be hotter away from next to cargo holds, for example. Again, the code limits the heating of self-heating independent of availability of oxygen. As I've said, we've controlled by the trimming of the stove, trimming it flat to prevent the carbon monoxide concentration. The CO level may greatly exceed the million without problematic self-heating taking place. So it depends on several factors, including what actions have already been taken the self-heating process, can of course also produce flammable gases as the coal breaks down. So in cases where we are called to advise, perhaps remotely, of what might be done to alleviate carbon monoxide concentrations in a cargo hold of coal, it is important to put relevant gas readings over the period since loading, which will include oxygen concentration and flammable gas concentrations as well. And of course, also important to consider other factors such as the ventilation history. Beyond that, questions that are always asked include what type of gas meter is being used on board the vessel, as the meter's make and model might, we need to establish what make and model is being used, as many types can be inaccurate, particularly when oxygen concentrations are very low and below 10% by volume. Some types of detectors will give spurious readings of carbon monoxide. If coal self-heating does progress all the way to fire, and it cannot be adequately controlled by closing and sealing hatch covers, there is usually little alternative but to commence firefighting, and in that case that's usually with water. The IIMS code says not to use water at sea, but if a situation arises, there may be little alternative. When considering how a self-heating problem occurred, our investigations will consider a range of information, including cargo declaration, pre-loading and loading conditions, including loading temperatures and trimming, and carriage conditions, including ventilation and gas measurements. And just to further complicate the matter, some coal contain methane gas that is released once the coal is mined. Methane is, of course, a flammable gas, and so it can present an explosion risk in ships' holds. Methane emitting coals need ventilation, which is the opposite of self-heating coal, where oxygen needs to be included. The code says to ventilate coals to keep the flammable gas level below 20% of the explosive limit, which is roughly 1% in air. Gas levels must therefore be monitored and ventilation done accordingly. It's important to consider whether a high percentage explosive limit reading is produced by methane emitting coal or by a self-heating process or burning reactions that might also be taking place. In some cases, methane emission has only been discovered once an explosion has occurred. And the code indicates that for coal cargoes, generally, hot work and other sources of ignition are to be avoided, and this is just good practice. Problematic combination occurs with coals that can both self-heat and emit methane at the same time. And we've come across this happening particularly with Indonesian coals. The problem arises, of course, because the actions one would take are opposite. Either excluding air by battling down or ventilation to clear a flammable atmosphere. Unfortunately, the code does not really cover this situation, so it may be possible to control by ventilating holes only just enough, just to keep the flammable gas level sufficiently below 100% of the explosive limit, whilst minimising air ingress to limit the amount of self-heating. The second example of a bulk cargo with the propensity to self-heat is direct reduced iron, DRI, a byproduct of the steel industry, which is made from iron ore by direct contact with hot producing gases. The resulting iron pellets are highly porous, so they can be highly reactive with both water and oils. Water ingress into holes, for example in heavy weather, can start problematic self-heating. Seawater tends to be more reactive than fresh water. DRI should be properly cooled and aged, passivated, before loading in order to reduce its reactivity. The solid bulk code requires loading at a maximum of 6 or 5 degrees, avoiding water, and certainly not loading during periods of rain. Closing up the holes as quickly as possible, and nitrogen flushing of the holes after loading to reduce the possibility of oxidation reactions going ahead. In my experience, DRI it's highly corrosive to the hull, and it's typically shipped in aging bulkers where hatch cover seals are less than perfect, a situation which can be exacerbated in rough seas. The continual monitoring of gas levels, including both oxygen and hydrogen, a byproduct of this water reaction, must therefore be maintained. If DRI does react with water, it gives off hydrogen, which is highly flammable, colourless, odourless gas, is easily ignited and presents a serious explosion risk. Initial heating due to a reaction with water can lead to a reaction with oxygen and air at moderately increased temperatures, and then further heating. Eventually the DRI can glow red hot and flames of hydrogen may be produced. If hydrogen evolution and self-heating do start, the DRI is likely to need unloading or blanketing with an inert solid, such as sand, or even blanketing with further inert gas if the ship is carrying additional nitrogen. The strategy here being to exclude air and limit further self-heating. But blanketing with solids, of course, such as sand, may give structural loading problems or even stability issues. DRI is split into three different types. Type C covers the fines material. It's typically iron fines that come from broken down pellets. And the fines, if wet, can evolve hydrogen readily due to this oxidation reaction with water. Again, the hydrogen gives the explosion risk, and therefore ignition sources such as hot work must be avoided. Fines are sometimes given other... DRI is split into three different types. Type C covers the fines material. It's typically iron fines that come from broken down pellets. And the fines, if wet, can evolve hydrogen readily due to this oxidation reaction with water. Again, this is because the fine material itself is so dense that the amount of air and oxygen. In general terms, cargoes of DRI should be properly certified, attesting to the analysis of moisture and fines contents, as well as the temperature history of the stockpiles over the period leading up to loading. And one of the first ports of call in an investigation will be to obtain and verify those documents. Just towards the end of the presentation, I just want to move away from self-heating events to look at some other ignition sources on board cargo vessels, and in particular bulk carriers and general cargo ships that have fixed cargo lights. The lights are often of a quite powerful halogen type that can easily ignite combustible cargoes such as grain, animal feed, wood chips, pulp and paper and the like. Smaller non-halogen lights can also cause ignition or perhaps sufficient heat, provide sufficient heat to initiate decomposition, perhaps in a cargo of fertilizer. The relevant guidance here, of course, is just to ensure the cargo lights in holds are not on and are properly isolated, often by removal of fuses in the electrical circuits, so they don't become inadvertently switched on by the crew. If a cargo light being left operating and does initiate a fire, then there may well be remaining electrical arcing evidence where wiring is finished in the fire, demonstrating that the lights were indeed on. Flammable liquids, flammable liquid cargoes, particularly oil products and other organic chemicals, present risks of explosion, particularly in cargo tanks, which are often followed by fire. Sometimes fire and or explosions tend to propagate to other tanks, and in that case, to investigate the cause, it may be necessary to work back to the origin tank by plotting the direction of displacement of the bulkheads between the tanks. At the first tank, the bulkheads are likely to be displaced in an outwards direction. In some tankers, the basis of safety is avoiding flammable mixtures, and that is by filling the headspace with inert gas. So avoiding incidents is mainly based on the operation of the proper operation of the IG system and to ensure it's used correctly. Something has gone wrong, then an assessment of the IG system and whether it had been employed correctly would be required. In other tankers, usually smaller ones, the ship may have no IG facility at all, in which case the basis of safety is likely to be avoiding ignition sources. So periods of higher risk, for example when discharging volatile flammable cargoes, so that air is drawn into the tanks and flammable mixtures are formed. Equipment such as instruments and pumps needs to be kept in good condition to avoid producing ignition sources. Procedures such as cleaning needs to be carried out in accordance with the relevant guidance to avoid producing ignition sources through static dispatch. ISGOP, the International Safety Guide for Oil Tankers and Terminals, provides detailed guidance on how tanker operations should be done and how electrical and static ignition sources can be avoided. If maintenance or repair work is going on, great care needs to be taken to ensure that all the relevant spaces are properly gas-free and they remain safe for work. We've seen instances where explosions have occurred because residual sludge or other materials in tanks has evolved flammable vapour after cleaning and gas-free, so that flammable mixture develop later. Thus, an investigation of the cause of tanker explosions will need to consider what ignition sources may be present and whether the events leading up to the incident are in line with recognised safe practice. By way of a brief summary, I hope that Burgoynes routinely encounter, what advice we might provide or are capable of providing, and how we would approach investigations after the event. We've seen examples of self-heating caused both by decomposition and oxidation reactions, ignitions of combustible cargoes by extraneous ignition sources such as cargo hold lighting, and explosions in flammable liquid cargoes. There are, of course, many other sources of ignition mechanisms by which fires and explosions can arise during the carriage of dangerous cargoes, well outside the scope of the time allotted to me here this evening. Thank you very much. We're of course happy to take any questions if there are. Excuse me. Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening. What are the precautions we need to take when we are loading a cargo as a first cargo? And second, we need to carry a steel products. Is it cause any oxidation effect on the steel products? When we are loading the coal as a first cargo, and second cargo I am going to load steel products. So even we do the tank cleaning, everything is done, still it cause any oxidation on my steel products?
If the tank cleaning is done thoroughly and properly, there shouldn't be any issues at all.
But it may cause, if it's like the phosphorus or chemicals of phosphorus on this thing, it may cause any oxidation. This doesn't indicate on our this test, silver nitrate test.
The silver nitrate test for
Salt
chloride.
water,
Yeah, for salt water is the biggest problem with steel cargoes, as it will promote
most
corrosion.
of the time I find that the first cargo is a coal and second cargo is from steel products. Most of the cargoes come with oxidation effect. What really happens to that?
Well, that's a good question, because I would expect both are capable of being oxidized, so I would have to have a look very closely at what might be going on there.
But I think
what are the other
you need
cargoes?
freshwater rinsing after you do the whole cleaning.
Oh yeah, with
For
the
the
salt
steel
water rinsing, then there's your problem.
What are the other cargoes can emit the methane like coal? Right? Any fertilizers can pollute?
Yeah, that's a long list, I should imagine.
Maybe cause fertilizers.
We have the NPK
fertilizer decomposition is obviously a big issue.
Yeah. Normal fixed sensors on most vessels will be oxygen or carbon monoxide levels. And that's where and then you have your portable gas meters or day-to-day readings. What would be the best sort of selection of gas testers that you should have on board? It's good practice. You will carry the usual range of flammable parameters.
Yeah, the standard configuration for gas multimeter will be oxygen, obviously for confined space working. We need to know that the atmosphere is breathable. Carbon monoxide. We have on a standard sort of off-the-shelf for gas monitor, the carbon monoxide level may be restricted. It might only go up to 500 ppm, whereas as a proper assessment of a cold case, you might be going up sort of into tens of thousands of ppm. So we have replaced the CO meters or detectors in some of our meters with a high range for that purpose. The other two detectors in the standard for gas configuration are LEL, usually methane, and H2S, hydrogen sulfide, just because it's so ubiquitous. There's a lot of and the risk again to personnel is very high. As a sort of catch-all, then that's why those meters have those selection for gases, because they're applicable to for many situations. But for DRI work, we have meters where we've swapped out one of the detectors for hydrogen. Done a fair bit of work advising owners who are shipping DRI, assisting the master during loading, saying, well, you're getting hydrogen being produced, we know that because we're measuring it. You can tell the shippers we are not happy to sail at the moment.
How do you see this problem? Very large container vessels. One way I would understand you can isolate a board if it's captured in the board.
I think I know the one.
That person was very lucky. She had a fire in front of the bridge because of the construction of the fire. Didn't really travel back. How do you see this as a problem, especially with these vessels getting the other big one? Especially Denmark.
I do see it as a huge problem. Seeing the effect that in particular certain classes of dangerous goods can affect the development of a fire. They might not be responsible for the onset of fire. They take class 5.1 oxidizing materials, for example. They once they get involved, they're going to increase the rate of spread and the ferocity of the fire. And some of these oxidizing materials, when they're breaking down, are also producing oxygen gas, as we saw with calcium hypochlorite, and that can have an effect on the how well a carbon dioxide fire suppression system can operate, because those systems operate by displacing oxygen, atmospheric oxygen from the hull. But if you've got a decomposition of an oxidized material going on inside the hull, it's producing its own oxygen, the efficiency, if you like, of the CO2 is going to be limited. So with the advent of these ultra-large container vessels, it's difficult to see that's what really can be done when something like that kicks off, apart from to find a means that's acceptable commercially, but limits the amount of dangerous goods that are being stolen up there.
Sometimes when you last thing you want to do is pay environmental lesson, and then all you can do is add more water, and sometimes that in effect creates a bigger problem.
Indeed.
But that's the only thing you can do is cool the vessel down.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, yeah.
I might be asking the obvious, but is the reason for misdeclaring cargo because of commercial reasons to pay more if it's shipping dangerous cargo?
I think that's generally accepted. You can answer that one for me.
Is that a nod of and my friend over here was referring to the mosque which I pass by every day going to my office. There was an explosion, and would that have been, that was a case of misdeclaring the cargo? And who's responsible?
I'm going to have to hide behind a conflict of interest here. and politely decline on saying anything in relation to that particular investment.
But it's not that vessel, to be honest. That's just an example. But this is quite a typical case of. But who's responsible? Who takes the responsibility of, putting down on that paper the cargo you're carrying, and someone verifying that's what it is, like you said.
Well, that's right. That's right. The booking clerk has got a lot of work to do, certain words will flag up. Will raise red flags, and they'll say, well, let's look at that a little bit more carefully. But realistically, there's still going to be cargoes getting on board and being stowed in the wrong place.
Some of the reasons for an accident could be traced to the commercial terms which would have used. We would have used the proper precautionary terms of the commercial contracts, which eventually would have led to somebody diluting the requirements and leading to an accident. Apart from this declaration, have you come across such issues in your investigations? For example, when you carry, let's say, DRIC or so, you need to have all those precautionary measures you have to take incorporated in the commercial contract charter partners.
Yeah.
The people dilute that just to make it easier and probably less expensive for them. But have you come across such issues where, because of the commercial terms are not properly framed, eventually it led to an accident?
But the DRI is a good example because yes, yes, I have. Yeah, that is caused. I mentioned about looking at hydrogen levels before the ship sails and
having a nesting tank on board and an inspector on board.
Yeah, because it's got to be. I think the hydrogen concentration must be below 0.2% and stable. And it's that word in the code, and stable, before she sails. And if it's fluctuating, going up very slowly, you can anticipate that it's going to continue at a similar rate for the entire length of the voyage. Is it going to be flammable by the time she reaches the port? But that's not really what the master wants to be doing, because he knows he could get stuck at anchorage for a week or whatever. So this is why it's important to have all the precautions in place, have everyone understand all of the terms and clauses of the code. They're there for a reason, designed for a reason. But that is one good example where I've seen corners being cut.
I would like to add to what Dan replied to Peter, this question as to what are the portable gas measuring equipments that you need to carry on a bulk carrier. Peter, it is the Kitawa tubes or the Drager tubes, and each one of them you have different tubes. So that will help.
The tubes are generally considered more reliable because they're not subject to as many cross sensitivities. And it's an actual chemical reaction going on in a glass vial that you can see.
rather than trusting an electronic interpretation of bottle tricks.
The problem with the multi-gas meter is always catalytic contamination.
Yes.
And your actual sensor can get damaged.
That's the Wheatstone bridge you're talking about, which we discussed in the second base. But they are still in use on the oil tankers.
That's for your regular LEL and all, yes. For example, your H2S sensor and all that, which are completely based on. No. Okay. Anyway, we can take this on later. No worries.
Have you had any, just going off the topic a little bit, NPK fires? Have you dealt with any of those fertilizer fires?
There was recently the Cheshire, which is.
What fire was that?
Fertilizer.
Fertilizer fire. It's not self-heating, but I think it, given a small ignition, it gets
falls into the decomposition, spontaneous
it's really
decomposition.
I still wonder why it's not called an IMDT cargo. If it has a problem, then it just gets the whole ship down.
Yeah, what about sulfur? Sulfur bulk too. As well, sulfur? Yes, sulfur.
Good evening, everybody. I thank Captain Nangia for inviting me for this function. I think we need this kind of platforms where achievements are awarded. And whatever dreams which we have, like Sagarmala, we can achieve only through such kind of excellence and achievement. Thank you.
Is growing. I would like to say that Cyprus and India have been enjoying a very strong cooperation in the maritime sector as they do in shipping. Some of the major Indian shipping companies of India, they are based and operate out of Cyprus. And we look forward to continuous cooperation in the years to come. And we would like to provide our support in any way possible. Therefore, I'm delighted to be with you tonight. Congratulations to the organizers and to the ones who have been awarded tonight. And we look forward to maintaining a very strong relationship between Cyprus and India in the shipping sector in the years to come. Thank you.
PRI, the loading temperature maximum limit 65, and I've seen temperatures or measured temperatures with the IR gun in Bahrain on a August afternoon, getting up towards 70, so we're above. But you scrape away the top of the pile, and underneath, you're not getting the direct sunlight directly impinging on the cargo there. It's a lot cooler. Far
the
more.
line, basically. Where do you say that's fine or that's not fine?
Well,
That's the Burgoyne's experience factor.
We don't have them all the time, do we? Consult them.
I prefer to be there taking the readings. Is it just a surface effect of the sun, or is it? If you've got you scrape away the top of the pile and it's getting hotter as you go further down, then yeah, that cargo's got a problem and you're not going to want to be loading it. I dealt with a case involving an agricultural cargo which was loaded by barge, which came alongside. The captain looked down over the side and saw a sort of discoloration on top of the stow on the barge and sent it away. So it went round the bend in the river and came back the next day and loaded it when he was probably washing some plastics. It can be difficult to keep tabs and keep an accurate and usable record of temperature throughout that loading process.
I've got another interesting question which you're going to love again. Wearing the IIMS hat, I'm sure there are a lot of our surveying fraternity colleagues here, either those who appoint us or those who actually go out and do some fringe investigation. Can you briefly let us know what are the dangers in surveyors taking on sometimes, I'm not saying always, sometimes taking on part of this? I know we've worked together, and where would you advise the surveyor to say, stop, it is not in my competence to comment on this kind of fire or this kind of thing? Would you advise our fellow surveyors here to actually stop and seek expert advice, and what are the dangers in doing it themselves?
I would always encourage direct contact and a chat, and just say, let's talk about the issues, and maybe there is some complex chemistry behind a particular cargo that might not be immediately service to anyone in the room.
Don't worry,
that you always.
You're buying the drinks today, it's alright. Say what you want.
Okay. Any further questions? I think just to add on to Zari's comment, when you're dealing with forensic specialists, I think the expertise lies in actually them understanding the risk of an explosion investigation. I had similarly to Zari, I have done one with them, and some of the risks that became apparent, like, okay, don't go on this ladder. It could have been heat affected, and it will break if you try and climb it. It looked perfectly fine, but in actual fact, those risks there are some of those elements there that we would not, I think, always be aware of. And it's nice that, or it's better if an expert who actually knows those particular risks investigates those kind of things.
We actually told the client, no, we can't do that. This is beyond our expertise. And that's when I contacted Dan straight away. Remember that one, Dan? And the client was very, very keen that we carry on and just submit. I said, if I give you something, there'll be a lot of ifs and buts, and I'll have a lot of SYA written in my report, but it will really not be admissible. You will not stand legs to, it will not have legs to stand on. And it became a little challenging to make him understand why they should be paying Dan's hourly rate and not mine. Slight difference there, but
Slight difference, yeah. I hope there's not a question.
well, expertise costs, man. That's where the drinks come from, I guess.
Right, okay. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I heard Suresh mention about providing copies of slides, so something that would be of interest.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Morning. We had dangers of what could go wrong when we are here, and we had dangers of what will happen when we are gone. That's almost a full circle. So, I think we have a person before that. I will call in Captain Zareed. Please talk on his vision of how he's going to take the IIMS forward globally and what part we are going to play in the Middle East.
Thanks, OP. A round of applause for our chairman. OP has taken on the cartwheel very successfully, and we're very happy that the helm is in the right hands. Before I say anything further, I'd like to give a token of appreciation to Dan. Dan, if you come for the photo moment, please. Obi, would you like to? No. Thank you very much, Dan. Make sure you put it up in the most prominent shelf in your office, mate. Thank you. Right, the institute globally is, I think, in good hands. I say no more. But saying that, I think it's a very big responsibility I've taken on from Adam Brancher, who when he took over was the head of AMSA and successfully completed his 2-year tenure and handed over the baton to me. And before him it was Bertrand Apri, who was the advisor to the European Union on ISPS matters. These are big shoes preceding me, so I hope I live up to the expectation. Well, we are talking on a 2-point agenda at the moment, and look forward to the September column that I'll be writing on the report magazine. Fellow IIMS members, please read through that. I'll share it. I mentioned it during my takeover talk in London, and I'd like to do more of what we're just doing, going live, keeping these presentations as a legacy. We are very fortunate as surveyors or consultants to be in an area or a geographical area where we have a lot of these opportunities to enhance our knowledge. We keep coming in for these networking events, the ICS, the Nautical Institute, the IIMS, all very active in their roles. But what about that surveyor who's probably on an island somewhere, in a very small town somewhere? And actually, the value of the institute surveyors and members is most felt when an underwriter looks for a professional surveyor in that corner of the world. And I think I'm going to focus more on those areas because the industry actually needs that. It's an industry-driven need. IIMS has to get prominent in its presence. I think it should fulfill an industry need. So that's my first agenda that I'm going to focus on. And we've got a fantastic person on the helm, Mike Swartz, who was CEO and executor, 7 others in the office who support him fantastically. And he's pretty much got an online vision as much as it is my storyline. I'm actually just taking it forward. He's already initiated. There are almost more than 100 YouTube videos already online, so and presentations. If you ever
have a doubt, you can look up the IIMS channel and you can look and search probably and sit down and read probably the answer to your question, sir. You could probably have that on one of our IIMS YouTube videos. I know Dan is quite...
Since I have many questions on that.
No, please. We've got a long evening, mate. Don't worry, I'm not the one to ask questions. But, so that's one. The second agenda is I want to monetize the members' association with the institute. So there is no reason why an IIMS member cannot expect multiple times his membership fee. I mean, I already know that there are 2 out of 13 clubs who regularly look up the IIMS database to look for a professional surveyor. We've put the CPD seal over there, which says that this surveyor is compliant with the CPD program. We now already got an okay from the board and declared at the AGM that we're going to come up with a phone app which will enable the clients to search a surveyor by category. So if you want a yacht surveyor, you just click on the yacht category and put down the geographical area. You'll get probably a handful of IIMS members, probably very close by to the marina with a dot on where it is. So if you all are into the surveying fraternity and you are not IIMS members, if this is not able to convince you to become one, I don't know what will. It's only 150 quid, pounds. So you can, I think, chip in that and expect its returns. So these 2-point agenda, without complicating matters too much, I'm already in the process of speaking to the board about making as many in-country reps and regional directors as possible. Even if it's a small little island in Mauritius or wherever it is, we already have one by the way there. But we're going to have as many in-country reps as possible. Multiplied, probably the vision that I have for myself is to double the number of volunteers. I mean, I was an in-country rep way back in 2006, and I can tell a story about not shying out of taking the top job at the institute. So there's nothing, if you continue giving your time freely to the fraternity and to the industry, I think it is possible. But point being that that's a soft target, it's a 2-year long target, but the idea is to have it as much out there with having as many hands and legs and the torchbearers of the institute, and hopefully the membership numbers will speak for themselves going north or south busy. But I know I'm coming in between you and your drinks and your snacks or dinner rather, but I want to thank Daniel for immediately over one phone call accepting the invitation to come and speak and generously sponsoring the evening. Thank you very much, Daniel. I have already got our next meeting for the institute. Sorry, I'm scaling up and the 16th or 17th. We already have a speaker in-house whom I would like to invite, Dr. Satish Mahapara. Please come up and tell us very briefly, because the burden of making them sit here and not have go back on the bar will be yours, not mine, about what you're going to speak about. There's something new and breathtaking in the business side of things that's coming. So I'll leave the floor with Dr. Mahapara. But before that, just one quick question. We kept the soft skill topic like Will's here. So being a surveyor by tradition, I'd like a show of hands of people here who have actually come here to listen to Daniel and to Suresh for Wills. Please put both your hands up. Lower one hand if you all have just come for one interest. One hand. So it's come. Okay, we got about 10% come. I won't ask which of the two topics. So we're a little diplomatic here, but majority of them who are sitting here have got an interest in both the topics. It's I don't know if the numbers are because of that that we kept a technical and a general theme to the evening, but or we got Sailor today who was live, so we don't only have people sitting here
and listening to us. And we also got people in the air watching us at home. I would like to acknowledge and thank Maritime Gateway for Maritime Sky for volunteering to come in. They're clicking some photographs for us, and they're going to make a small video for us, 2 minutes. Thank you very much. So you can see there are a few changes that we've made. We've changed skin, and Obi with his new chair and his new responsibility, a fantastically shiny we're going to have a little bit more momentum. Before I go, Dr. Mapara, are you going to speak about the sponsorship later? Yeah. It's only costing 1,500. Unfortunately, the surveying fraternity is already gone. We're not running more than 3 surveying fraternity sponsors, but ship owners can come in, lawyers can come in, and technical experts can come in, correspondents can come in. It's going to go on for a whole year. It's only 1,500 chips, but we're restricting the numbers so that we don't have a cluster of too many out there. If you intend to do to give us a sponsorship for the year, which we can have more and more of these, please let us know. I'll put a hand up of all the committee members. You can contact any of them. Jen is helping us. There's Nikhil here, please. Opi's here. Peter's there. So anybody you can contact. It's only 1,500. No surveying firms for this year, but if you intend to do it next year, please let us know. We'll be happy to line you up for next year and give you the first right of refusal for next year's CBA. Any other company who want to give us support so that the next time Daniel wants to come and speak, we don't have to hold a gun against him to ask us to sponsor him. But thank you very much, Daniel. And Dr. Mahapala, please tell us about the next one. On the 16th or 17th?
Whatever it is.
We will announce the date.
Primarily the marine related or offshore people, maybe part of them settled down in the onshore, and they are all into that marine industry. I feel that the time has come that we have to diversify the subjects into some commercial subjects. Today, it's a great pleasure that Suresh could produce a very good small write-up, and he gave us the PowerPoint business on the wheels. My desire, which I was telling Zahir and other members, that we should go more into non-technical subjects. And the just small announcement which I want to make it, that we are a lot of technical consultants here that can be commercial consultants in any field. If you are based in Dubai and if it is connected with the Department of Economic Development, DED, they have recently introduced several changes where if you have to be a consultant, any type of management consultant, now the rule is changed, and you will know it very soon, that you will have to pass the examination. The Ministry of Economy has signed with the American University of Dubai, and any type of consultancy license that you want to apply, no doubts historically they have been always asking you to have your attested certificates, whatever degree that you have, it has to be notarized, attested, legalized with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then you submit and the license is issued. But now onwards, current licenses, if you want to amend the license activity, then you have to appear for the exam. Addition, subtraction is okay. But any additional activity, you have to appear for the exam, then you have to pass that exam, then you have to pass give the certificate, and the activity can be amended, not otherwise. Any new licenses or renewals, also the examination is compulsory. According to the department, there are almost between 28 and 33 types of management consultancies. You will find them in the booklet, which is a very old edition, but it is a booklet published by Economic Department, and you will find what are the types of consultancy. Here we have marine consultant, we have a cargo consultant, we have a claims consultant, we have a logistics consultant. Any type of consultancy that you have, please bear in mind that it is not automatic. Each activity is well defined and described in the booklet, but none of us has ever bothered to see what those activities, whether I'm capable of doing or not doing. We write in our website so many consultancies, but we are not allowed to cater. The fine that is introduced now is between 20,000 to 50,000 dirhams. That it is not automatic. Each activity is well defined and described in the booklet, but none of us has ever bothered to see what those activities, whether I'm capable of doing or not. We write in our website so many consultancies, but we are not allowed to cater. The fine that is introduced now is between 20,000 to 50,000 dirhams. This is not within my purview, and you please appoint that it is not automatic. Each activity is well defined and described in the booklet, but none of us has ever bothered to see what those activities, whether I'm capable of doing or not. We write in our website so many concerns highlighting that in September, overall supply chain management connect to the finance, banking, marine insurance, any aspects of commercial shipping, any of those areas, I would like to offer almost 15-20 topics to him. Over a period of time, it could be myself, it could be any of my other colleagues from the industry. I would recommend to them to come here and address the gathering and see that we all get enlightened by the commercial aspects of the shipping. The topics that I have in mind are, I could give you abruptly, which came in my mind was offshore companies which you can incorporate in different emirates. We don't have a knowledge that how many free zones you can incorporate, how many free zones are in Dubai, how many are in Abu Dhabi, how many of them, what are the differences between the offshore companies and the free zone companies. So that's one topic. Another topic could be trade finance. How do you get the trade finance for your business? So topics are something which I will give it to them, and it is up to them to choose. Accordingly, we will pick up the topic. But September topic I will give, and I would like to address that.
Thank you so much. Before
I will definitely come to you for definitely. Thank you.
Now, who want to answer will last 2 years of closure period of IIMS Dubai branch, you can't forget that. So I call upon the past chairman and
In Glorio. Bharti.
And I ask Captain Zali to please hand over the chairman.
Peter. Well, I and he's been recently nominated as a fellow of the institute, so he has to basically pay more for his membership now. Thank you, Peter. And Bharti, yes, you get one for being a fantastic supporter and living the legacy of one of our first supporters of IIMS, Mr. Will Henderson. She has lived up to his vision, because Henderson International was the first company that supported us, and Bharti, for the love she had for the gentleman and for what Will stood for. She's continued to support IIMS, for which we're extremely thankful.
Last but not the least, Captain Zarin, how can we leave you without giving you something?
For what?
for making us proud.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I get something as well.
So that's it. Drinks and dinner is waiting.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks.